What's going on, everybody? Tom here with Ketolifestyle, and today we are making a keto-friendly chicken pot pie. Why? Because the weather's starting to cool down a little bit. It's officially fall, although you couldn't tell by looking at me because I live in Las Vegas and it was 100 degrees, so apparently someone forgot to tell the weather out here that. But anyway, it is comfort food season, and chicken pot pie just spells comfort food. So stay tuned to the end for the taste testing, but let me show you how to make it.
First things first, we need to chop up our vegetables. So to start things off, we are going to chop up 2 ribs of celery. Celery has almost no calories in it, so I find that it's a great thing to add for some flavor. Next up, we're going to use half an onion, and this is not going to be a very fine chop. I basically cut the half that I'm using into 4 strips, as you can see here, and then just ran through and chopped it with my knife. Next up is 1.5 pounds of chicken thighs. Now, I'm just going to cut these into 1-inch cubes. But first things first here, I definitely owe a shout out to Chef Santa PJ. He's always hanging out down in the comment section. Gave me a tip last video about putting a wet paper towel under the cutting board so it doesn't spin. Totally works, guys. So if you have an issue with your cutting board spinning, do that. And full credit goes to him because I did not know that. Now, my chicken thighs were completely thawed, but I do find them easier to cube if they are still slightly frozen. I mean, your knife can still go through it, so not rock hard, but just a little bit frozen, they cut much easier. Now we're just going to throw these in a small pan to get them cooked up. We have to cook the chicken before adding any vegetables because the cooking temperature of chicken is much different. We don't want to cross-contaminate. While our chicken is cooking in a smaller pan, we're going to take a much larger pan and add 2 tablespoons of butter, followed by the celery and onions that we just chopped. To that same pan, we are going to add half a cup of frozen peas and half a cup of carrots. Now, you can leave the carrots out because they do have a high glycemic load, but I find that a little bit adds some flavor and it doesn't hurt you too bad, but it does bump up the carbs a little bit, so bear that in mind. We're also going to add about 1 clove of minced garlic. Now I'm going to stir this around and cook them a little bit until the onions become slightly translucent. You don't want them fully transparent, but just starting to turn translucent is about the stopping point. Now that our chicken thigh is fully cooked, we're going to go ahead and add this to our pan of vegetables. As you can see when I bring the pan over, the onions are about translucent. We're going to add the chicken thigh straight to that pan with all the juices included. Those juices are going to help add some flavor. But to bring up the chicken flavor a little more, we're going to add a cup of chicken stock. To that, we are going to add half a cup of shredded mozzarella cheese, followed by half a cup of heavy whipping cream. Now just give this a quick mix to allow things to incorporate and the cheese to start melting before we start trying to season it. The first seasoning that we are going to add is 1 teaspoon of dried thyme. Next up is half a teaspoon of salt, followed by half a teaspoon of ground black pepper. Now we're going to mix this up and set it over medium heat until it thickens. In the meantime, let's preheat our oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit while we make the crust. First ingredient going into our crust is 1 cup of superfine almond flour, followed by 1 tablespoon of flaxseed. Flaxseed is going to help thicken the dough without making it too thick like you would get from psyllium husk powder. Next up is 1 teaspoon of xanthan gum. Xanthan gum helps air become incorporated into ketogenic baking. So when we add our leavening agent, which is 1 teaspoon of baking powder, that xanthan gum will help the air stay in the dough. Next up is a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, followed by a 1/4 teaspoon of thyme, and a 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder. Now I'm just going to give this a quick mixing until everything's well incorporated before we start adding our wet ingredients. The first wet ingredient is going to be 2 tablespoons of room temperature butter. Make sure your butter is soft, guys. Hard butter will not work for this. Next up is 2 tablespoons of sour cream. Now I know this is looking weird, guys, but trust me, it turns out to be an awesome buttery flaky crust. And the final wet ingredient is the whites of 1 egg. Now, adding the whole egg seems to produce a much denser crust, and since we want something that's light and fluffy, I stick to the egg whites. Now, you can totally save the yolk and add it to an omelet in the morning. Now we're just going to go ahead and give this a mix with our wooden spoon. At first, it's going to seem like there's not enough wet ingredients, but the more you work it, the more you'll see it becomes a nice dough consistency. Now it is time to roll out our dough, and I'm going to do this between 2 sheets of parchment paper so that it doesn't stick. You're going to aim for about a 1/4 inch thickness across the entire sheet. You want it to be evenly thick. Since I'm going to be baking the one for the pictures in a ramekin, I'm just going to take the ramekin face down in the dough, give it a little wiggle to break the dough apart and give it some room, and then peel off the rest of the dough. Olivia's going to take that and roll it into another sheet to use the casserole dish that we're making the rest of it in. As you can see, the filling has thickened, and I've been stirring it every couple minutes just to make sure that it doesn't stick. Now I'm going to add a portion of it to my ramekin, and then the rest of it's going to go in that casserole dish. To add the crust, I like to leave it on the parchment paper, lay it over the dish, and then just peel it off. I find that this is the best way to do it without tearing your crust. And then it's important to poke a few holes in there just so that the crust doesn't explode. Our oven has come up to temperature and the pot pies are ready, so it's time to stick them in there. I find that 10 to 12 minutes gets that crust just about perfect. Now that my timer has gone off, I'm going to pull them out. And there's that casserole dish with the rest of the pot pie that I mentioned to you earlier.
And now that you guys have seen how to make it, it is time for the taste test. So, let's give it a go. Now that is absolutely outstanding. Now I'm not just saying that because it is my recipe, but the crust on this thing is phenomenal. It is flaky, it is buttery, the filling is really creamy, it is really fatty. It is just absolutely delicious. It is everything that I want from comfort food. So if you guys like the video, leave it a like. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section. And if you have not subscribed yet, do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, show some love, and I will see you guys in the next one.